because of our size, kids are able to participate in a variety of different activities. Versus in many larger schools, it might be that you have to really focus in on one activity to make that team or make that cast. So that's something I've always been thankful for here at TAISM.
Ms. Cuddy spoke a bit about her sacred text. I think about the Discover Oman program, a digital sacred text that we send out every year to all the students, where they make sure they choose their trips and they get their parents' permission. And then we send a paper one later, and I always feel like that one is a real important part of the program, to make sure the families are aware where the kids are going, and the kids have had that discussion at home so that everyone knows what's coming up. And I think that makes for a better experience than when parents find out a day before the trip where their children are headed off to.
Do you feel as though your packing list would be another example of a sacred text? Like here's what it is that you need to bring in order to have a successful trip?
They don't always bring what I tell them to bring. The students don't.
Chapstick.
Yeah, chapstick was a bad one year. But yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even really thought about that. You follow that one, things seem to go pretty well.
Okay.
Mr. Lee, do you have anything like that for after-school activities? I know in the elementary, they sign up for them.
They do. It's a little different in middle school. I used to call my red clipboard in the office my sacred text, where kids would sign in and tell me where they were going to be. But that would just not necessarily like that. I think our sacred text for ASAs might be the calendars we put around, or it's just mainly telling people what we're doing. I think one of the traditions in middle school that's important with ASAs is that there's less structure to it than in elementary school, where you don't have to register for things ahead of time. It's more of if you're interested, come and show up. Obviously, there are activities like sports or drama or certain clubs that require more of a commitment that you do sign up for. But traditionally in the middle school, we've really tried to be a little bit more flexible with that.
I think that's important for the kids at this age as well, too, to learn a little bit of that independence and be able to make some of those decisions on their own, and then follow through with that as well. I think it works well in the middle school.
Is there some sort of, like in the athletic program, do they have any sort of, I don't know, like a player code of ethics, or is there any like handbook that if you're going to participate in this sport, you kind of subscribe to these sets of standards?
Yeah, we've got a couple things that in the high school, the high school kids will get a thicker, maybe 4 or 5 pages of a student athlete handbook, and we talk about it. We've started doing student athlete meetings at the beginning of each season, so we get all the kids together, and we had 120 or 130 kids last week together for this season's meeting, and talk through some of those the highlights of the student athlete handbook, and then the kids get a copy shared to them. And then just like in the middle school as well too, the kids and parents sign a player contract. Just a brief kind of overview of some of those expectations and beliefs that we have in the sports program. So we've got those types of documents as well.
What are things that, if you're participating in athletics, that you can't do if you want to stay on the team?
I think we talk more about the expectations of what we'd like you to do. We'd like you to be someone who comes in and works hard every day and comes in and communicates with coaches. We talk a lot about that. Who puts forth their best effort. And comes out and enjoys trying to get better. So some of the things that students need to do, they need to do well in school. They're student first. And the coaches and athletic director and principals and counselors are all there to help you with that type of stuff. So being a good student, being a good person in school as well too. If you're getting in trouble with the going to see the principal and having to stay after school or any types of those things, that's not the type of behaviors that we would cherish in the athletic department as well too, and we'll help you kind of learn how to correct those things and fix those things a little bit as well.
Hey, speaking of just taboos of ASAs in general in middle school, participation in after-school activities is a lot about trust and us being able to trust students to make choices about where they are after school. And so one of the taboos, and the only time I've ever had to tell a middle school student that they aren't welcome after school, is when they aren't where they're supposed to be and are not being honest about what they're doing after school. So it's really important to say where you're going and what you're doing, and make sure everyone in your life is informed of that.
Yeah, for us it has to do a lot in the rehearsal process. Like if a main character is not, really if any character is not there, like it makes rehearsal that much more difficult because you're missing somebody on stage that needs to be there. And so for us it has a lot to do with, if you're not going to be here, it's your responsibility to come and tell me that you're not going to be here in advance so that we can kind of plan around your absence. So it's one of those where the kids sign a contract basically saying, like, if you have a certain number of times that you don't show up and you don't give me a reason why you don't show up, that I reserve the right in the best interest of everybody else involved to ask you not to continue participation. And I think it's that level of responsibility of making kids just, this is a big commitment and I need to make sure that I have the time for this big commitment, and if I don't, how do I get the help to do what I need to do?
Kendra,
Yeah.
in your years of doing the drama stuff, how many times would you say you've had to ask somebody not to participate because
Zero.
of that? Yeah?
Yeah, zero. It's a and I think that's what's been great is it's that communication piece. It's like, I'm not saying you can't come. I understand that you've got robotics, and I want for you to also enjoy your robotics experience or enjoy your basketball experience or whatever, but there comes a point where, you know, my rehearsals are quote unquote more important than your rehearsal, you know, than your practice because of where we are in the rehearsal process. But you know, while there is time, go ahead, you know, be in a variety of things. Just know eventually I'm going to ask for my thing to be the thing, you know, within like 2 weeks of the production. So,
I feel like your play is more important than sports, if you had to rank them.
well,
Yeah.
it sounds like you're trying to ask if Luther works harder than I do. I don't necessarily think that's the case. No, I feel it's not more important, it's different important. I think that it accesses a different type of kid. I think that it accesses a different set of skills. And I think that kids can be successful in both of them. And I just think that they're both incredibly important experiences for kids, because kids that do athletics aren't necessarily the kids that do the play. And I think that it's important that they have opportunities to explore both of those options if they're of interest to them.
Sounds like it might also be about teaching kids to prioritize their time and manage their commitments. And
Yeah.
so decision making about what I'm going to participate in and when is important.
Yeah, I would say so.
Ryan, coming back to Kendra's question about taboos and stuff like that, for Discover Oman, in your years organizing, have you had to tell a parent and a family that their kid's not going, or take a kid off a trip? And not to get into it, what happened, but how many times would you say that's happened in?
Well, the ones I remember mostly are injuries that happen on a trip. But those are definitely not taboos. Those are accidental. Of course, there are certain behaviors that would have Mr. Lee and I coming out to bring someone home. And those are pretty obvious. You know, they're the ones that would be the kind of behaviors that would get you sent out of a class to go see Mr. Lee during a school day. Would be the exact same behaviors you would expect would have a teacher chaperone calling me and recommending that a student come off the trip. Now, along those lines, though, it's difficult because I'm not there, and so the great part is we have such good teachers that are out there with the kids, and they have good judgment. And these are all things we talk about ahead of time. Even though we have wonderful students, we recognize sometimes people have really bad days, or something might go wrong, and a behavior problem could bring someone home. So it's definitely a possibility, even though I can't remember any in particular in the last 4 years where that's happened.
Sometimes part of it, like you said, is things that you might get sent out of a class for. One of those might be lack of participation or engagement. And where it's different on a DO trip is if you're not engaged and you're not participating, that can become a safety issue. If you're
That's
not
true.
staying with the group, or if you're just not participating in what's going on, you become a barrier for the other students. Maybe even more so than you do in a classroom.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we always have 2 teachers out there with around 20 students. So if one teacher has to take care of one student all day, that does make for an unsafe situation where there are one remaining teacher has a lot of kids to look after.
All right, well, gentlemen, I think just due to time and making sure that we as a group have some time to debrief about what these kids have noticed, I want to thank you for participating in the discussion about what role do different activities play in the life of a TAISM student. And yeah, thank you guys very much.
Yeah,
You're
thanks
very
for
welcome.
having us.
Thank
you. All right.
You're welcome.
And scene.